Thank you so much for tuning in to Mom Jeans, trying to fit into motherhood.
Welcome back to Mom Jeans, the podcast. We have a special guest today, Kylie, joining us. We are going to talk to her about moving to the U.S. from Australia and having kids here and the decisions behind that. We are your hosts. I am Lisa, a girl mom to two girls.
And I'm Danielle, a stay-at-home mom, boy mom, and a military spouse.
Yes, and this is Kylie. So Kylie, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, feel free to give us whatever you want.
Sure. So Kylie, as my accent comes out, you will hear that I'm definitely Australian. Been living in the US for 3.5 years. I am a boy and girl mum with a toddler and an infant. So, yeah, things are a little bit wild at the moment in the best way.
That's awesome. Like, your babies are so cute. You have the cutest kids. That's crazy how little she is. I love it. How have they been doing together?
They're good. We were just looking at photos because we think they look really similar. So we were looking at baby photos of my son to see how much he looks like my daughter. And yeah, like the nose, the mouth, they look a lot alike as babies. Aww. So it's going to be interesting as they grow.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome. So you said you moved here 3.5 years ago. What was the process like to move here? Why did you move here? And what were your considerations?
Yeah, so my husband is an academic, so we moved here for employment reasons. And to kind of explain, yes, Australia has universities, but the resources around research in Northern America, there's a lot more. I guess there's more universities, there's a larger population, and there's just more depth and breadth in the research. So when we were back in Australia in 2021, he was finishing his doctorate, and he kind of knew that he'd be looking for a postdoc role overseas somewhere. And so we were looking at Canada, the US. We didn't really look at the UK or Europe, although I guess we could have. So yeah, we made a call between Canada and the US based on a couple of factors, including the job. I am a permanent flight risk. I've lived in quite a few different countries, and so I was ready to, I was waiting for him to finish his PhD so we could have some sort of adventure. So then we moved. It was at the end of the pandemic, which was an interesting time to move because, like, logistically, there weren't many flights going between A to B. And so moving was kind of challenging from that perspective. But yeah, it was just kind of, I don't know, like a fun adventure at that point. So this was pre-children. So this is before we had kids. And so we moved to Colorado initially, which, I don't know, I guess the Denver Boulder region is considered a friendly region. I would say it was a soft landing. It was an easy place to land. It's lots of lots of outdoorsy stuff you can do. People are pretty friendly. It's pretty easy, I guess. I don't know. So we found that transition pretty easy. With like the actual move, like when you get employed and you get your visas done for you, then that makes that easy. Obviously, you're still going to navigate things like getting a social security number and opening a bank account, all that really like boring life admin stuff. But it's all easy. Like it's not, obviously same language. Our cultures are similar but different. And so that was all quite easy to navigate as well. Yeah.
So let me back up for a second. So you said that you were a traveler to start with. So did you live elsewhere as a kid or was it as you got older?
Both. So as a teenager, I lived in Europe, so Germany. And then once I'm an accountant professionally. So once I got my the equivalent of a CPA, I've taken quite a few overseas roles. So including Japan, the Pacific, so like small islands kind of in the middle of nowhere between New Zealand and Australia. Well, even further, yeah, between probably Australia and Hawaii might be a better description.
Okay.
And I did a pretty long stint in East Africa, in Tanzania.
Wow.
So yeah, I'd done a bunch of these things. So when I met my husband and he was doing his doctorate, I was like, how many years have you got left? Like, when can we leave Australia? And so that's kind of how that happened. And for sure, he would have looked for a role outside of Australia, but I probably was nudging him to do it sooner because I was ready to for an adventure. We are both runners, so we were kind of attracted to mountain towns that that I guess were different to what we could find in Australia, because Australia doesn't really have altitude. It's quite it's a really flat country. Yeah. So that was kind of cool. That was part of the adventure. Yeah.
So I would assume that you guys had talked about having kids before getting married or, doing whatever, but did you talk about the logistics of raising kids in the US as opposed to Canada? And also, it was the plan, okay, we're going to go and just see what happens, or are we going to try to raise kids in the US, or are we going to try to raise kids in the US for a minute and then pop back to Australia where family is?
Yeah. So a couple of kind of funny things. So I was 38 when I had my son, and I like a lot of us thought it would take a long time to conceive. It did not. And so it was kind of like, well, where this adventure's happening now. And so things that we did not know, if you have a baby, as a foreigner, if you have a baby in the US, they become an anchor baby. And so I'd never even heard the term before. I didn't realize that my children would be US citizens immediately. And so yeah, I just hadn't thought about it because I fell pregnant and was like, well, we live here, so this is where our children will be born. Like, I didn't really, I know it sounds really blasé. I didn't think about that bit. I did, when we fell pregnant, I didn't have a primary carer. I had not seen a doctor at all in Colorado at this point. So I had to find a doctor. Australia has a universal healthcare system, so that is wildly different to here. And so that was a consideration when we were planning on kind of thinking where we were going to deliver. We could have obviously returned to Australia and done everything kind of basically under a public health system, which is a complete foreign concept here. Obviously, it's the same as what Canada has.
Yeah.
And so we'd always planned to have, we'd talked about and planned to have children, or hoped to have children might be a better way to say it. And then it was just the timing. I, like a lot of women in their late 30s, was, I was like, okay, well, this is going to happen. If we can, successfully fall pregnant, then this should happen sooner rather than later. And it did. And thankfully, where we lived, we had great access to really good doctors and healthcare, which is definitely privileged and great. But that was a consideration because, it's very different to the system in Australia, where you can basically walk into a public hospital and you don't have to have an insurance card. You can, and they'll take care of you. And you just, whichever doctor's on call is who will look after you, which, as you both know, is wildly different to how things work here.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So you said you were in Colorado for how long?
For 18 months, so enough time to fall pregnant and have a baby, and then leave pretty soon thereafter.
I was going to say, how old was he when you moved?
About 3 weeks.
Wow.
I know. It sounds crazy.
You're brave.
No, it does sound really crazy now, particularly when I think back and think about having a newborn, but I think about trying to drive for 12 hours and all of our possessions in a U-Haul with a toddler, and I think that's a good point. That would be a massive headache. So a newborn, as you know, they sleep a lot, and you can stop and feed them, and they're pretty cozy in a car seat. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds crazier than what it was in reality.
Yeah. Okay. And was it basically that your husband was chasing job, a job, or was it like you guys were like, you know what, this is not the place, Colorado's not the place for us. We know this isn't where we want to be.
We love Colorado, and I'm like super grateful that it's actually a neighboring state to Arizona, so we can go visit and see the mountains like pretty like, you know, each summer so far. No,
Nice.
he basically, my husband basically got a promotion, and so moved. Moved to university here. I work remotely, so yeah, like a lot of us, I can live anywhere, which is nice. And then living in a mountain town, which kind of we can't replicate exactly in Australia because we don't have high mountains. So that was also something we both kind of were pretty happy about. But then I don't know, like, I guess it sounds really flippant, like how much did we think about what it would be like having children? And I think maybe a little bit like a lot of parenthood, your role, like there's only so much you can plan, like you roll with things, like, and even if you think you're going to have a particular delivery or you think things are going to go a certain way, it's probably best that you're not really attached to those hopes because that's not always how it turns out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we know about that.
Yeah, someone told me last week that they went with no birth plan into the hospital, and she said it was great because she had no expectations of what, like, I don't know. So she said her delivery was great, and I was like, that's a good point, because she's like, I didn't make a plan. I was just like, here, I'm here. So I think that's funny. Yeah,
that's brilliant. Like, that's so wise.
Yeah, I know. I was like, that's great, because then you're not so held on to like what you wanted versus what you actually got. So
yeah, when it inevitably didn't go as you hoped.
Yeah. So you said your son and your daughter, they're U.S. citizens. Are they also is that dual? Are they also Australian citizens too?
So okay. Yeah, you have to apply for it, but because we are both Australian, it's granted. I haven't yet gone through the process with my daughter to start. I haven't started that yet. But yeah, and then at some point, they'll be dual, and then I guess at some point they may choose one over the other. I have no idea. It's hard to see it. It's hard to imagine it through their eyes, and it's also hard to imagine it for them as adults. So that's kind of wild. I think about that, and I'm like, if they go to college, I wonder where they might want to go to college. And I think about things like that and think, I don't know, I hope that's like opening up opportunities, I guess. Yeah, but that's also, I don't know, it's hard to imagine our children, going to college, right?
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to. It's too, make it be far away. I don't want to rush it.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point too. Like, Brandon and I were talking about how a lot of kids that we went to school with, they wanted to go to college where their parents grew up. So for example, like, my cousins grew up in California, but their mom was from Illinois. And so they were interested in the Illinois schools, and me being from Illinois, I'm like, why would you come to Illinois from California? But it's like such a nostalgia thing, right? And it's such a family and very, very cool process to kind of think about that. And that is interesting to think. Like, I think too, Kylie, I'm also a traveler, and I think that it's really amazing. I've traveled alone a lot, and to think of my girls doing that, it terrifies me, but I also want them to have that incredible experience. And probably better than anybody with all the places you've been, sometimes those are long plane rides, but it's a plane ride away. You can usually get to where people are, and you want them to have that lifestyle. I think you told me do you have nieces and nephews?
Yeah. So my sister is back in Melbourne in Australia, and so I have a niece, and my brother-in-law is Italian, and so she's half Italian, half Australian.
Oh,
and
cool.
So, of course, she's like bilingual, and they go back over to see her nonna, her grandma, and her grandpa and her uncle pretty regularly. And they definitely went as much, which I don't know, if you've got children under the age of 2, travel as much as you can. They're free.
Yeah.
Internationally. Yes. And we were just talking about that, like, so we've booked a trip to Australia for January, while my husband and I both have parental leave. And yeah, like I think my daughter will be like relatively easy because she'll be 3 months old. So she's breastfeeding, she's sleeping, she's like attached to me. Whereas, as you know, a 2.5-year-old could be, causing everyone a headache on the plane. Yeah. And so like totally like, you talk about like, like fear of as your children get older, them traveling and them being independent and free, but also like instill it like when they're under 2, because that's when it's, or even like under 6 months, because that's when it's actually really possible as well.
Yeah. That's a great point. But is your niece, is she older, or is she like similar in age to your son?
She's 9 months older than my son, and then it gets funnier. Her and my daughter have the same birthday.
Oh, fun.
I had a scheduled cesarean, and so when I found out the date, I messaged my sister, and she's like, I had a really funny feeling that was going to happen. And I'm like, that's wild. Like, that's so wild.
That is wild.
So she's about 3. Yeah, she's a little older than 3. And
okay.
Yeah, it's cool though. She's bilingual. So she talks to my mom in Italian. That's cool. And my mom doesn't speak a word of Italian. And so... But she doesn't know she's doing it because she's 3. And so she just flicks between English and Italian. Yeah. And that, I don't know, I think that's really cool. I think, talking about opportunities.
That is so cool.
I hope living here that our children have the opportunity to learn Spanish and to be, pretty, fluent in Spanish, which it would be unlikely that they would be learning Spanish in school in Australia. So, talk
that's
about like, differences and opportunities. The education system is similar yet different, and I think that's a really small positive like difference that I hope for. I guess, yeah.
That's what I wondered. Is it like, do you talk to your sister from time to time and hear the differences between raising a kid there, comparatively? I mean, to be fair, I have been to Australia and Melbourne and Sydney and Tasmania, but different. But it's like, and I know it's similar, but I literally, and I don't ever mean to like make this sound offensive, but like when I got to a hostel in, I think it was in Sydney, everybody was like, do you eat Cheetos every day? And I was like, absolutely not. No, I sure don't. And they're like, we can't have those here. That's awesome. Like, the way we do them, because they're disgusting and have all the dyes in them and everything that's illegal everywhere else. And I was like, this is amazing. Like that I'm cool here, like I have this cool accent to them. But yeah, I love that. And I loved the gap year idea there. I think that is such a great concept. Like I wish I would have gone to school when I wanted to go to school, not because I had to go to college. I didn't want to go to college, and it made it very difficult, and I didn't do a very good job, and it's very expensive to not do well in school, I think.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, the premise of it is like, it's so smart because like kids are like so burnt out by the time they've done their SATs or the equivalent of that in Australia, which has a different name in each state. So I'm not going to bother saying it. Yeah, kids are so burnt out. And then also, how can we expect them to know what they want to do at the age of 17 or 18? And so, if they take 12 months off and they either travel or they go on nanny or they go and work in they go and work in retail or something, or, and particularly if they travel and they can see more of what is out there and available. I did not do one. My sister did one. She went to the UK. But I traveled in between my first and second year in college. And so our break is over the Christmas period. So it's over December, January, February. Yeah. And and when I came back, I actually changed my degrees and changed my majors because I'd had some like pause and perspective. So yeah, I think it is really wise because how many of us would have like, I don't know, would we have had different career tracks maybe? I don't know. Or would we have just approached college differently because we, had, I don't know, a different kind of perspective and some different skills. Yeah. So hopefully we can encourage our kids.
I know, you know what? It's so funny because we're at the stage where we're like, all right, we know we need to start saving for the girls. And I'm not really wanting to put into the education fund because I'm like, what if hopefully, you know, like all these, maybe education will be free by then. And, you know, what if they don't want to go to school? You know, who knows what's going to happen. But yeah, like it's such a weird thing having worried about yourself for so long. And now you have kids and you're like, I don't want to rush them growing up, but I can't wait to see the decisions they make for themselves because yeah, like I was talking to one of my bosses recently and they're hiring for a position and she's like, well, their degree is in this and they're applying for this job. Like, that's crazy. And I was like, okay, do you want to know what my degree is in? And she's like, yeah, what's your degree? And I said, golf. Like playing golf, professional golf management. And she's like, wait, what? And I was like, she lives on the res and she's like, you can do that? And I was like, you can do that. And I said, do you think I'm a decent worker? And she's like, you're an awesome worker. And I'm like, yeah, your degree doesn't matter, I think, as much. And I can't speak for other places, but as much here, as long as you get a degree, just get a degree and show you could graduate college or do a year or two of college, then it opens a lot of doors for you. But it's really interesting. But
yeah, and also my thought on that is like, I don't know, like it's kind of the opposite of like, do they really need a college degree if it's not in a specific, like if you don't need a certification, like a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, like I feel like we should emphasize more on some of these like skill or what am I thinking? Vocational schools, I guess. Yeah. Where you can learn like a skill, like how many people know how to do carpentry or build a house? I mean, there are people, but I feel like it's not a lot of people are going into those fields, like how to wire a house. I don't know. I'm just thinking outside the box, like,
yeah.
Because sometimes I feel like some of these degrees, I'm like, what can you do with that? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just weird.
Yeah, it is. So I know you can't predict the future, Kylie, but do you foresee yourself staying in the US or is it who knows what happens and we'll go from, day to day?
Yeah, so there's probably, I don't know if we're in agreement. There's not in like a not in a bad way, like more of a what opportunity is going to take us. So we have pretty wildly different careers in a good way. The last couple of moves have been for my husband's job, and so at some point we probably it's likely to be me. And having lived in East Africa, I would love to take the family to Africa for a couple of years, or I think I can negotiate 1 year, but I think more than 1 year makes sense to move that far. Yeah, I think that would be, I have a lot of friends that live where I used to live and they have young families and there's international schools available and just, I don't know, I think of it and think, I spent my childhood playing outside in the backyard, learning a language, learning another culture, having things just a different perspective. And as I said, Australia and America are like similar in some ways and different in loads of other ways. But to live somewhere like East Africa with children, I think would be incredible. And particularly and for me, selfishly, to see it through their eyes. Like there's nothing like, we've got there's a piece of art in my house with a zebra, and my son's always like, zebra, and I'm like, yeah, mama used to live where they live. And that doesn't mean anything to him, but I would love that to be, I don't know, I think that'd be really cool. And so I think when we get to the point of that happening, which isn't going to be, is probably 5 years away or so, we would take that gap year or that sabbatical to have a bit of time and perspective to think about whether we want to live in the US or Australia. And again, a place of privilege to say, which country do we want to live in? That's so cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah, totally. So that's my hope. And you know my husband, so you can be brave and ask him directly his thoughts on this. I think he's up for it, but I don't think, I don't think he knows what to expect in that case.
So, and what do you think goes into that consideration too of like what is the good age to do that for them? Because what does that look like? I mean, you said there are international schools, so you would do that rather than homeschooling, or what do you know? What kind of thought process do you go through on that?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because the education system is a consideration for us, period. So our the education systems are kind of like they're similar but a little bit different, and we both feel comfortable with the elementary schooling here.
Yeah.
Where when we moved between Colorado and Arizona, we did look at like what education was available. And, you know, it was a consideration, obviously. My husband's an academic. Of course, it was a consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think during elementary school would be a good time to do it.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because a lot of the international schools do the IB program. And so it would be pretty challenging to put a kid in high school or middle school to start an IB program or to move into it and come back out of it. Because then you'd kind of he'd be deciding whether to set them up into the IB program or not. And so, yeah, I think, that schooling is that's kind of important. And honestly, even to move from the Northern Hemisphere back to Australia, in Australia, we use the calendar year for education, whereas here in Europe, the school year starts in August. So that's even a consideration. Right. Like if you did move, you'd either a child would either have to go ahead or go backwards 6 months. Yeah.
No.
And so you wouldn't want to be doing that around middle school, I can't imagine, or high school. I think elementary school would make sense. Yeah, and even thinking about moving schools within a city or, within states is a big move. And internationally, it's a lot more like
that's what I was wondering, like what their standard is of education as well. Like, is it, more, I don't mean to say it disrespectfully, but is international like better? Like, are they smarter? Are they teaching?
Yeah. So when I lived in Tanzania, I had a lot of friends who were teachers, and so they taught at either a British school or another international school, and so they teach the curriculum based on that. And so maybe the consideration is that you do want to send your child to a British school, or yeah, when I lived in Japan in my 20s, I had American friends that sent their kids to an American school, which made sense, of course. That helped them set them up to go to the college track here in the US. So
got it.
Yeah. When you talk about standard, it's like, well, it's like, what curriculum are they teaching? And then, and then a little bit like between different schools here, you have different, ways of testing and like, what does is it a 1 year of SATs, or is it over a 2-year period, or is it an 18-month period? So there's those kinds of things. And our children don't all learn the same. We don't all learn the same. So at the moment, I've got a 6-week-old. I have no idea how she's going to learn. I can kind of get a glimmer of the 2-year-old, but not really. And so, it's, I think, way too early to tell. But so I think in general, elementary school, it would be a good time to kind of,
I love that.
Yeah, to make any moves. And I say that now, I probably feel, who knows how I'm going to feel about this in 5 years' time.
Isn't that so interesting? I mean, it's like I said this to Brandon recently, like I'm having such a battle with being close to family, but also wanting to live our lives because we only have one shot at it. I only have 2 more years in my 30s, and I'm in my 40s, and it's like I only have one shot in my 40s. So at what point do you do these things for the girls and for me? And at what point do you stay around for the family and being close to your family? I think it's a challenge to really figure that out. The other night I couldn't sleep, and I was searching job boards in New Zealand for Brandon's jobs because I went and visited New Zealand for 4 weeks, and I just loved it. And I loved the lifestyle. I loved the people. The people were so friendly. I was laughing because I was like, it's such an interesting thing when you're like, I went to school in Nebraska from Chicago. And when I went to school in Nebraska, like it was culture shock for me because it was a lot slower of a lifestyle than Chicago, but also for them who lived on like their farms, and they hadn't been out. Like, they're like, "Are you in a gang?" And I was like, "Certainly not." "Have you ever shot anybody?" "Definitely not." You know, like, but they live, because I was from Chicago, and they lived, and you'd realize like a lot of them lived on farms and their parents never left, because who's going to run the farm when they go on vacation? It's not like you can just leave the farm and it's all the animals will feed themselves. Right. So I think that that's such a crazy thing. So then when I went to New Zealand and I was on a hike and it just started pouring rain on me. And I was like, I'm like a wimp when it comes to that stuff, because I'm like, floods. We're going to, it's going to be a flash flood. I'm so scared. And this lady saw me and she's like, "Hey, why don't you just come over to my house for some tea?" And I was like, I like looked at her and she was like, "I mean, you don't have to." I was like, no. Like, "You're not going to murder me, right?" And she's like, "No, like what?" It's like, oh my gosh, like that's such a cool thing for, like, Brandon and I have talked about now. Like, we want to take our kids now on trips to other countries. And Hannah's already been to 3 different countries and she's not even 3 yet. It's like, that's a very cool thing to be, a very privileged thing to say. But like, we went to France and she was under 2 at that point, and she went and wanted to jump on the trampolines with the little kids, and the little kids are speaking French to her, and she's obviously not understanding what's going on, but they were like looking at us and asking us why she wasn't responding, and we don't know what they're saying because they're speaking French. But I was like, they're kids and they will communicate and they'll find a way to communicate. So they just grabbed her hand and took her to the trampoline and just started jumping with her. And I was like, that is an amazing experience that you don't have as an adult, because you're closed off, you're worried, you're whatever. So and I keep telling Brandon, like, it's my dream to get out of the country and really immerse ourselves in a different culture and have our kids know no other way. I mean, it's just awesome. And to a great point. I mean, America is a fantastic place. I love being here. I love that we are in driving distance to Colorado, Utah, California. We've got it so good here, right? And the whole country is so different and diverse. But it's also kind of fun to get yourself into a situation where you don't speak the language and be like, we're going to figure this out. We're going to be a unit. We're going to be a 4-people unit, our kids and us, and we're going to do this together. I think that's awesome, Kylie. I love that. I mean, I know you don't have, sometimes there are times I have a hard time understanding some of the words you say, but you are in the same language, that's awesome. You're so brave, and that's so awesome.
For you, talking to me is like me talking to my toddler some days, where you're like,
yes.
Like, yep. What did you say? Can you say it again? Can you say it again? Oh,
yeah. Could you say it again?
Yeah.
I laugh about that because my grandma was from like South Carolina, and it was probably, I think I was 16 before I understood anything she said, because her accent was so thick. Danielle, like you can get people from...
Yeah, if you watch Moonshiners or whatever on TV, when people need subtitles, I'm like, I don't need that. I totally get what they're saying.
You can speak, you understand them.
Yeah,
but we're in the same country.
It's funny you say that about the South, because my experience is people talk so much slower that actually actually helps. Like, for sure, there's the accent, but yeah, the speed helps, and that's me saying So maybe that's what I try. I should just slow down, and then might make it easier.
To be honest, maybe this is just me, but I swear, like, I feel like Australian accent kind of reminds me of like a Southern accent, the way how you say your words. I don't know. I told my husband that. He's like, I don't know if that's actually facts.
We get, it's funny, we get asked pretty regularly if we're British or, I've been asked British, New Zealand, South African, and someone one day made it like a British joke to me, and I was just like, and I just smiled politely, and they were like, I got that wrong, didn't I? And I was like, yeah, you did. But I was like, I understood it, but also British people might find it offensive if they knew you thought I was British, because I really don't sound it.
It's so funny.
That is the craziest part too, because like being from Chicago, you speak more Canadian, so people would be like, "Oh, you're Canadian," and I'm like, I mean, that's cool. I'll go with it. I don't know much about Canada, but let's go with it, right? So, I think it's it's an amazing, it's amazing, like we said, considering kids now and just being like, wow, I'm not making this decision really for me anymore. It's like, what? And, you know, Kylie, I think we've talked about this a little bit of like, Arizona doesn't have the best public school system, you know, they're not.
Yeah.
And it's really hard because like where I grew up, the public school system was incredible, but like my parents' property taxes were $11,000 a year. Like you weren't going to private school in my parents' situation.
You're paying for it.
You paid twice. Yeah, you'd be paying twice to go to private school and, you know, and use but it was such a good schooling system. And now you're like, all right. And I said that to Brandon the other day, like, is it selfish of us to stay in Flagstaff because we love Flagstaff and we love the outdoor lifestyle, we love camping, we love doing all that for our girls to not, luckily we have private schools and the private schools are good, but it's like, yeah, you start to say, you know, what sacrifices are you willing to make for your kids and what sacrifices are you like, you know what, this is where I'm going to draw the line and they're going to learn some different things, you know, than I did.
Yeah. And I mean, like I had never heard of the basis schooling system before moving to Arizona. I had to we looked that up. But I also my eldest is 2 and, you know, over the next couple of years, we think about where he might go to elementary school, but without really knowing how they learn. And then like my husband and I both had really different educations, experiences because we grew up in different states. I grew up in the DC equivalent in Australia. I grew up in Canberra. So that the capital. So like a faux economy where everyone is even more educated because, you know, you've got like the government workers are paid, like it's a false economy. They're paid a lot more than what, you know, the rest of the economy across the country is. And so the state schooling system is really good. Neither of my parents worked for the government. It's just where we lived. So yeah, same. I had this like incredible education system and I look in Arizona here, particularly in Flagstaff, and I'm unsure, but then, you know, does that mean you can supplement or do you look at things like, you know, the private or like something like basis, or do you get halfway through and then, you know, see how your kids are going? Because Danielle, as you said, like, are our kids going to be academic or are they going to be interested in doing a vocation or a trade or something? I don't know. Like, yeah, I was listening to a book about, you know, kind of parenting and just that something that stuck with me is that you don't want your kids to say, oh, my mum or my parents just poured everything into me and they never looked after themselves. And so if you know, if my children say, oh, mum always stepped out the door and went for a run, she always like made sure we went hiking, she always made sure we had adventures. Like I can only hope that's what they say, as opposed to like all she did was like look after us and pour everything into us. Like I can only hope that they can see with perspective when they're much, much older that maybe I was a little bit selfish and maybe I did look after myself. Maybe I did do those things for myself, including travel, because I think I don't know. I don't want to change that. I still go traveling by myself like that. You know, I went to Sri Lanka in the summer with a girlfriend.
That's awesome.
I think I was at the beginning of my second trimester. So spicy food was really hitting not so well, but you know, that's not going to change for me. Like, I think it's a big part of who I am. And I hope that my kids can look at that and hopefully they grab inspiration and not just think, oh gosh, she's going off again. Yeah. So Lisa, not being selfish.
I think that's awesome. No, I think that's a great point. Like I'm glad you said that because my mom had terrible guilt for being a full-time working person. And so she was always with us when she wasn't working and she didn't have friends. She didn't go out. Like maybe once a year she'd go out with her work for their Christmas party. And it was like getting her out the door for that was a nightmare. She's like, but I'm like, Mom, I'm 15 years old. Like, I'm going to be all right. I'm going to be okay. Like you can go and
I'm going to eat my Cheetos.
It is an amazing thing. Yeah. My Cheetos and Pop-Tarts. Okay. It's going to be fine. Yeah. But it's like, I love that point. And I've said that to a lot of the girls group here that I hang out with. When Hannah was born, I think I was at one of their houses for a girls' night drinking, even though I was breastfeeding, like pump and dump. But I was 2 weeks after she was born, and they're like, I can't believe you're here. I'm like, I need this. Like, you guys are like saving me. I need this. I need to feel like myself. And I same thing. Like, I keep asking anybody who's like partially my friend, like, who wants to go on a girls trip? Who's ready? Like, I'm ready to go. Cause I same thing. Like, travel is what keeps me alive. Like, it's what if we don't have a trip booked, Brandon's like, well, just book something because you're going nuts. Like, I'm like, yeah, that's the way my old boss texted me today, and I haven't talked to him in a while. And he's like, where are you going for Thanksgiving? I was like, you know me well. I can't sit still for too long. I just want to have experiences and do things. So that's really, really fun. But
I feel that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my husband's old job, he would travel everywhere. He would just be gone all the time. And so when he would come home, I'm like, okay, what are we doing? What are we doing this weekend? Where are we going? And he's like, I just want to stay home. I'm like, I can't help that you were just in, like, I don't know, Japan or wherever you were. I was like, we got to get out of the house. And so, yeah, I do miss traveling.
It is it's also a challenge balancing that with because oftentimes, like, my husband's quite a homebody, and so I'm like, oh, like, we've got a 2 week break, like, school's closed for 2 weeks and you don't have to be on campus, like, let's go to that national park we should go and check out, because obviously we want to try and see as many states and national parks and different places while we're living in America. Yeah, and sometimes he's like, can't we just stay at home? And I'm like, part of me is like, yeah, that is good for the kids, but also a little bit like you, Lisa, like going a little bit insane at the same time. Yeah, it's hard to balance with and I think sometimes you're too busy thinking, oh gosh, it'll be so hard to do that car ride, it'll be so hard to get them on the plane, like the kids, oh, we have to pack and organize so many things, and it's like always worth it. But I think sometimes the thought of it is more than you think it's too much.
Yeah.
I was on before I had Hannah, I got on one of those like traveling with kids Facebook pages, and I was like, I think that's actually what got me into my like a little bit of holy cow, I'm having a kid, I'm ruining my life spiral, because on those pages they're like, don't travel until your kids are 10, and I'm like, oh, I'm not doing that, and like people sometimes were like, are you just doing this just to tell people you brought a 6-month-old to do this? I'm like, no, I'm doing this for me. They're not going to remember it. She's not going to remember it at 6 months. I'm like, no, she certainly won't, but I will. I'll remember how I, went and conquered that. And Hannah now, like, she's almost 3, but she loves going on the airplane. Like, she is like, and now that she's not 2 anymore, she's like, I get my own seat. She gets so excited for that, and it's like, where are we going? Like, and it doesn't matter where you say. You could say you're going to like Timbuktu, and she'd be like, yes, like, doesn't know anything about it. And she's like, tell me all about it. Like, I can't wait to go. And it's awesome. Like, I hope that she continues to want to do that, because the other component of it is the older they get, the closer to activities they get. And then it's like, oh, you're not supposed to miss practice for, whatever. And then it's same thing. Like, I was talking to somebody today, and they're like, oh yeah, travel while you can. Cause like when Santa Claus starts to be a thing, Christmas gets harder when you're traveling. I'm like, well, Santa's going to travel to wherever we travel to, cause I'm not staying home for Santa. Sorry. Because I remember getting to the point too, where my friends, I didn't want to miss out on what my friends were doing. And I'm like, how do I raise my kids so that they don't have that feeling? Like they would rather travel than, like miss out on just one movie night or whatever. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, but how much can we influence it though?
I know. I had a conversation with a mom one time, and she's like, I had like a, friend in high school that was a terrible influence on me. And, like my parents like almost banned me from seeing her because I treated them horribly when I would come home from seeing them. And my friend was like, well, I'd like to think I'm going to have the most influence. I'm like, oh boy. Well, I hope that works out for you, but I can tell you in my experience that is not going to work out for you. But, you know, I wish you the best of luck.
That sounds optimistic.
It is optimistic. I know. I mean, obviously, we're the coolest parents around. They're going to totally want to be around us all the time, right?
Well, and then hopefully they get to a point where they don't want to be around us and they want to go off and do their own adventures. Yeah. Like,
that's an interesting component too. Like, I keep running into people and they're like, oh, I hope my kids live close to me when they grow up. I'm like, oh man, that, like, I kind of hope they don't, for the fact of like going to see things, right? Like, I understand people who lived and were born and raised here in Flagstaff and they're like, oh yeah, like I never left. Like, I understand it's a cool place. But then you see the people who left and then they still came back because they're like, it's the best place for me. And I was able to go out and test out some other places and to make sure that was the right move for me. And not because of their family, because it's genuinely a very cool place to live for some people, you know.
It also, like, I've moved around a bunch and my parents visit me wherever I go. Well, so far they have. I remember when I got a job in Japan, my dad said to me, couldn't you have gotten a job somewhere where I want to visit? And I was like, gosh, I'm sorry. Not, really not. And then funnily enough, they visited me 3 times in the 2 years I was living there because they loved it. So I was like, well, you would never have come here had I not moved here. So that's turned out well for everyone, hasn't it? So hopefully that happens.
Did they travel with you a lot? Growing up, did you travel a lot?
No. I mean, I'd been, like a lot of Australians, like we, I don't know the percentage, but it's definitely a higher proportion of Australians own passports than Americans, I think. And that's a fact that someone can check and tell me I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. But also there's a very different size population. They didn't travel when they were young, and my dad traveled a bit for work domestically and internationally. And I traveled to New Zealand with my dad as a teenager to go and watch rugby. And that was really fun.
Oh, fun.
Cool. Yeah. And then we started doing overseas trips as a family to like Fiji and then Southeast Asia. Ooh. I remember I came to the States when I was 10 years old with my family, which was cool. It was all Disneyland and, and the like, which of course as a 10-year-old was amazing.
Sure.
Yeah. But I think I don't know when the pendulum swung that they would come and visit where we were. They definitely, both my sister and I have lived in a couple of different places and my parents have always visited. And I think, for them, right. I don't know if they would have gotten to Africa, but they basically had a tour guide who could speak the language and organize their safari. And they, to this day say some of their best holidays have been going to places that they never thought they would go that I randomly decided to live. So that's kind of cool. And then talking about like hoping your kids travel, I hope that my parents are in their 70s, so I don't know if this is going to get timed out, but I would love to be able to put my kids, or my son at least, on a plane to go and spend a couple of weeks with them, or to like meet them halfway or something. There isn't really a halfway between here and Australia. I guess Hawaii is the closest thing. It's a giant ocean.
Yeah.
I think that would be really cool. And then, for them to kind of have the experience together. He's 2 now. Like, I guess my parents would be in the 80s before that's possible. So I don't know. That might be a pipe dream, but I like the idea of it.
But you also have your sister. True. It doesn't necessarily have to be your parents. It could be your sister. I mean, I got on the plane by myself a couple of times to go down to Florida from Chicago to go see my grandma. And that was back in the day where like they let you walk all the way to the gate because there was like no security. She could walk me to the gate, and then I got on the plane and then get off the plane and my parents were at the gate. But it was the coolest experience to be like, I got to fly all by myself. Like, I got to do all this cool stuff. And I think I was probably 10. I don't think I was like young, and I wasn't older, but those are some cool experience to be able to tell people, because a lot of parents weren't cool enough to like be like, yeah, I can trust my 10-year-old to get through an airport, and to hang in an airplane for a 2.5-hour plane ride all by themselves. That's very very cool. And I hope that too. I think that's a cool experience to have that cultural
here's hoping.
difference. Yeah, here's hope. I know. Can I send Hannah on the plane with him and they can adopt him? That would be awesome.
Well, now that they're going to be at the same school, so you never know, they might become buddies.
Hopefully. I hope so. That would be awesome. Yeah. Well, I think this has been awesome. Thank you so much, Kylie. Is there anything else that you think that we should cover as far as...
I have the most random question. Does your son have an accent?
Yeah, it's I don't think he really does. It's probably going to be his vernacular that we notice, because there's different words. Like, he'll be like, "That's a trash truck," and my husband and I will be like, "Oh, is that what you call that?" Because
what do you call it? A rubbish truck?
Rubbish truck. Yeah, like just there's things like and I can tell when he's learnt something at school, because he'll come home and say it, and I'm like, "We did not teach you that." So I think he'll have an accent on words that we use more. And then I think because he's going to school here, I think he'll have more of an American accent. But I wonder, like, over the summer break, if it comes back and his Australian accent becomes stronger. I don't know. My parents visited in the summer, and he definitely was saying they have stronger accents than me because they grew up in a different part of the country. And he was definitely saying mate, because that's what my dad was saying to him. And so
I love it.
Yeah, I don't know, like, I just think it's cool. Like, I don't, he's going to sound
so cool
however he sounds. I know, Lisa, you'll have to tell me when he speaks if you think he does. I can't hear it.
Yeah.
Cute.
I think it's so funny, because we were just watching a video the other day about a guy who grew up in China, but he was like, he looked like a California surf boy, and he was like, had the Chinese like English accent, and it was like, whoa, like, it's based on, where you're learning. Like, I remember talking to people in Europe when I traveled in Europe, and they're like, it's all based on what shows you're watching. So if you're watching American shows, then your American accent, you're going to have an American accent. If you're watching British shows, you're going to have a British accent as a non-English speaker. And I'm like, yeah, that's a very interesting component for sure. I think it's really cool. It's a very cool, like, it's even cool to me to like be like, oh, okay, so if Hannah went and hung out at your house, and she heard you guys, and she could learn from you guys in a different upbringing. I mean, same with me in a way, like Midwestern upbringing is different than here. Like, I would, it would be very interesting. It's still funny. Like, when I'm like, somebody will come to visit and I'll be like, well, let's go on a hike. And they're like, okay, take me on an easy hike. And I go take them on a hike, and they're like, Lisa, that is not easy. And I'm like, oh yeah. Like, I have to remember, like, when you're in Chicago, it's flat as can be. There is no mountain. There's nothing like with elevation change. And it's like hard.
One of the funny thing about accents is, thanks to Bluey, everyone, like, I have people say the funniest things to me, like, oh, did you see that Bluey episode? Or one of my girlfriends here said to me, oh, whenever my son's watching it, I always feel like you're in my house in the background.
Yeah. Are they Australian?
Yeah.
Bluey is.
I haven't watched it yet. Cool.
You'll have to. Yeah. How old?
I've seen it. He's like a year and a half, a little over a year and a half.
Okay. Maybe over the next like year or so. They can get into it. It's very wholesome, but it's very Australian as well.
That's so funny.
It's so funny, because I listen to two podcasts that are Australian podcasts, and I like, it's funny because the words that they use, like, we would never use those words to describe something, and I'm like, I've started to do that, and people are like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, the one is a parenting podcast, and he always calls kids gorgeous, and I'm like, we would never in the States call it, because it's like creepy in a way, like in the States, but then I've said it, and I'm like, people are like, what are you saying? I'm like, oh yeah, like, but I it's just like it's really cool too to listen to different cultural things, like, I mean, Australia's not super different, but it's like, there's still things that they do differently, and I'm like, oh man, that's a really fun way to learn things too. I think podcasts are.
Yeah, I'm always amused when you tell me what you've learned from that podcast and what you hear.
Yeah.
He actually lives, the podcast that I think you're talking about, I'm pretty sure he lives in like the neighboring suburb to where our apartment is in Melbourne. So that's kind of
No way.
25 million people, and that's just how small the world is.
Oh my gosh. I always wanted to live in a small town. And then when I got here, I was like, it's not that small. And now I'm like, it's small. Like I remember being in Nebraska for college, and somebody would be like, oh, this person's from Chicago. Do you know them? I'm like, do you know how many people live in Chicago? Like, that's not how that works. But even still here, like, I think there's 75,000 people here. I don't know how much of that, if the students count for that or not, but yeah, but like, 50,000 people, that's a lot of people, but this town gets small fast. I mean, Danielle, even like how small this town gets.
I still don't think it's a small town.
I know you don't. You
like
are
3,000 people, So I'm like, that's not small.
Yeah, that's what Flagstaff feels like.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, coming from like a big town, it feels small like that. But I love that. I've started to really love it. I really do.
Yeah,
it's funny that
I wouldn't want to live in a city.
That when you said, is there anything like that I've thought about, like in terms of raising children, any differences? We were living in Melbourne, which is a city with 5 million people in it. And so I guess a consideration for us was so if we think about moving back, we actually think now that we've lived in a small town, we probably wouldn't move back to a city like Melbourne. I mean, I think about childcare in a city that big, and just the conveniences you have with a family and how good a small town is. Like it's a 7-minute drive to my son's school, with every red light that you could get, all 5 of them, and whereas, I think about what a commute would be like, or what, just the logistics of moving kids around a big city. And I don't know that, to live in a city, I think of Flagstaff being a small town relative to a city like Melbourne, not relative to an actual town of 3,000 people. But somehow, you've still got all your conveniences, which you may not have in a town with 3,000 people. That's probably been a bigger consideration for us with raising kids.
Interesting.
Yeah, what could we, if we wanted to live somewhere similar to here back in Australia, where would it be? To have to feel big enough yet small enough, to have the community. That's definitely been a factor for us. And I never imagined living in a place this size. I've lived in Tokyo,
oh my,
20 million.
Cow.
Yeah, exactly.
The holy moly.
Where the only reason you run into someone is because you're a foreigner. Whereas and you stick out. Whereas here, you can't go anywhere without running into someone in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so. And I know you traveled and you've moved a lot, but can you? And I'm sorry, we'll cut this off soon. I could talk forever. I could talk to a wall for hours. But really quickly, so the first time you ever moved out of the country, were you scared?
I mean, that's a tough question because I did an exchange when I was 16. So maybe when the first time I moved as an adult for a job, so I was 25, moving to maybe a bit younger. It was 20, whatever. I was in between, let's say I was 25. And I moved to Japan, and that couldn't be culturally more different. And there's components of the culture that are quite xenophobic. And so in terms of feeling, if you're ever going to have homesickness, it's going to be in that environment. And I just, it was so different. And working was really different. Everything. I obviously couldn't read. I was learning, I had learned Japanese and I could get by, but I couldn't read everything. Not being able to read that's really hard. It's different when you travel in Europe because you can make things out. You're like, oh, that's the sign for the toilet. I can work that out. In multiple different languages. Whereas in something in, many Asian countries or in Russia or something like that, you can't even, you're looking at a symbol that you potentially have no idea what it means. So I guess I love travel and culture so much that I'm always going to look at it like an adventure. But living is different because you're this is my life. I want, I'm choosing to do this. I want to be happy. But I always just, I mean, I did some made friends, ran my first marathon, like just traveled within Asia, like went and tried to do, you know, got to like some really remote areas, just, you know, tried to always look at it on the side of like, oh gosh, I'm going to have so much opportunity here. I'm going to get to do so many cool things. Even if sometimes you're like, I literally can't speak to anyone on the street, because this is like, you know, 15 years ago where people didn't really speak English in Japan. They do now a lot more.
Right.
I need directions, and I literally, if I stop someone, they're going to have no idea how to talk to me, and I can't get what I'm trying to say across in Japanese. So yeah, I don't know. Just even if you feel isolated, to like look at the, I don't know, the bright side. I know technology's changed a lot now. Like we're never, you know,
Sure.
Yeah, being able to WhatsApp anyone at any time, or, you know, video call, FaceTime, you just, yeah. It hasn't taken it away from travel, but it's definitely less, you're going to feel less alone.
Did you feel any different, I mean, because you are able to communicate like that, did you feel any different moving with a kid? Did you have any thoughts of like, ooh?
Yeah, so we moved states with Bailey, and, you know, like stuff like you think about like, oh, he doesn't have a doctor. That's that's my son. Yeah, where are they going to go to school? Am I going to get childcare? Things like that, which you don't like think about necessarily for yourself. Like, oh, it'll be okay. Like you're much more like, oh, I'm resilient, I'll be okay. Whereas kids, you know, things can happen. And then like, I guess I think about like, now he has friends. You know, he comes home from school, I ask him who he played with, and he names his friends at school. And he's 2. You know, like once I want to uproot him in elementary school, is he going to resist because he like has formed these friendships and doesn't want to? So yeah, it's, I don't know. You can kind of you know your own resilience, but you don't know what your children will and what won't adapt to, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a big thing. I mean, I've been talking a little bit about agonizing over taking Hannah out of the school she's in now and moving her to the school she'll be going to. And I'm like, is this the right move for her? Like, will she be able to adapt to this? And I know she's at the time will be almost 3 years old when it happens, and the likelihood that she remembers it is very low. But at the same time, you're like, she does same thing. She comes home, she talks about her friends, and you're like, she's not going to see them every day like she has been. Is that going to be a really big struggle on her? And are we making the right decision for her? And that's, man, it's just amazing to think like, I was an overthinker before kids, but like times 100 now. Like it's just every move you make, you're like, am I doing the right thing? Like, this is crazy. So yeah, that's, I think it's awesome because I know, Kylie, you are an awesome person and you pick up on friends quickly and develop really good relationships. And I think that probably is because of having moved before and finding ways to survive through, you know, sometimes the really challenging being by yourself kind of lifestyle, right? And that's cool for your kids to watch and to see.
Hopefully. I have one last story, and then I promise we can drop off.
Oh, yeah. No.
When I lived in Tanzania, I was learning to speak Swahili, and I had a local staff member who was incredibly patient with me. And I'd been doing something for work, and we were standing in the kitchen talking about something. And I was trying to say that the road was dusty, and I said the road was salty because the words were really similar. I looked at her and was like, that's not right, is it? And we both started laughing, and that was fine. And she turned to my boss and said in Swahili, but he translated because this was above my Swahili level at that point. He's like, she said, it's so good. Kylie's shameless. And she meant like, the translation obviously is brutal, but she meant like she's brave, like she'll just try like that.
Yeah.
And I think about that now, and I'm like, yeah, who cares if the road's salty? Like, you just say it.
Yeah.
Doesn't like
just
if you
try.
if you start talking to someone on the street and they don't engage with you, oh well, like it's fine.
Yeah.
Like just dive in. So yeah, the road's salty.
that the road's salty. That's a great way to end that. I think that is such a thing that like you can teach your kids to not have the self-consciousness that I grew up with that really, really bogged me down for a long time. I think until I was probably 25 or so. And it's like, that is an awesome thing I literally want to write that and put it in the kids' room. The road is salty. I'll be like, what are you talking about?
Go ask Kylie. She'll explain.
Yes, I love it. Well, Kylie, thank you so much. This was awesome. So awesome. If you ever want to come on again and talk about anything else, we are totally, totally great with that. And thank you.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure.
Good.
And that wraps up another episode of Mom Jeans, trying to fit into motherhood. Thank you again so much for listening to us. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider giving us 5 stars so other mothers out there like you can find us and listen. If you would like, you could follow us on any of our socials at Mom Jeans, the podcast. If you have questions, would like to send us your birth story, or give us suggestions or things that you would like to hear, please email us at hello@momjeansthepodcast.com. See you next week.